Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman. I'll be your host for the next hour, but I will not be alone. We've got a full house today here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend for freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Today is Monday, June 25th, year of our Lord 2018. So if you are listening live, we have a call-in number, 717-467-1736. I'm going to be introducing some very controversial topics today, and they've been going on my Facebook thread. You've been hearing them in the news about the immigration issue, as well as a post I had put up earlier last week, and that was with regards to the Constitution. Last show that we had, I discussed, was the Constitution really a friend or an enemy to liberty? And I want to expound upon that a little bit later on. We had a very lengthy discussion on our Facebook wall. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman. Also, Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. I have 2 accounts on there. Our network has its own page as well, Cerberus Radio Network. We have a fan page, CRN. You can find me on Twitter at Cowgirl Esquire is my handle there. We have a YouTube account. We have a YouTube channel called Cerberus Radio Network, where our shows are archived there. A lot of the things we talk about kind of shake people up, and they get upset at first, and it's difficult to let go of what you have known your whole life. For instance, our talk on state sovereignty, our discussions of nationalism versus federalism, our take on immigration, my article that I wrote for the 10th Amendment Center on the constitutional solution to immigration. We'll be discussing that today. That gets people upset. There's an alternative source for you to learn the truth. So we talk about, I mention on my show frequently, there's a trifecta of evil that is keeping the American populace ignorant, and that is the government, the media, and the education industry. The latter two regulated, controlled by the former, I beg your pardon, in the means of regulations, grants, licensing. The message airs on the side of big government, on the side of nationalism. But as you're going to realize, there's a truth out there. You can go to Liberty Classroom. Jeff, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. You can go to libertyclassroom.com. Tom Woods has very generously granted us a password for our listeners to get a $40 off basic membership. So it goes from $89 to $49. Go to libertyclassroom.com. And if you go to the checkout counter and enter the code CRN, you can get that price. Jeff, I found that has been very informative for us. And I know, let me bring on also, I have Justin Spears with us. He is the host with Mike Margison of The Other Side. We have other shows on this network. You can go to our app. We have a free one that you can download for the Android device. Jeff, there's still an echo there. It's really distracting.
I know, and I have no idea where it's coming from.
Okay, well, we'll just have to deal with it then. Jeff Johnson in the studio producing today. He has a show called The Paradigm Shift. And Justin and Mike, their show is called The Other Side. You can find that. Mike Meharry shares his podcast here as well. He also has one with Peter Schiff, the Schiff Gold podcast. So if you're interested in learning about investing in gold. Just a quick announcement for those of you that are aware, the Yellowstone series did premiere. It is the Paramount Network's newest, it's their flagship show that aired on the 20th of June, last Wednesday. It will be on again this Wednesday. And I usually don't talk about entertainment, movies, that sort of thing. The relevance here is that this part of this show was filmed at my home. So a couple times, there were a couple scenes last week where I recognized familiar scenery on my street here. One of the actors sent me a message and said, hey, I think your home's going to be shown next week on the show. So I'll point that out when I see it. So that was kind of interesting. The show itself is entertaining. There are some, as you would expect from a Hollywood presentation, some errors with regards to cowboys, that sort of thing, and horses. But overall, the show's really entertaining. It illustrates some current issues and conflicts with regards to cattle ranchers, the general government, and the Native Americans. And this is just another instance of culture clashes from the days gone by that are still rearing their ugly heads today. And the situation is still relevant. And we have to ask, how do we deal with these? Well, one of the ways that we propose dealing with our issues such as immigration is to decentralize. I want to introduce first, before we get into that topic, a good friend of mine, Boyd Craven, is returning to the show today because he also has a book out. So I want to bring him on for a few moments. And Boyd, you're welcome to stay for the entire show because I know you have some great commentary on some of the things we're going to talk about. Boyd Craven, you have a new book out. Welcome to the Wasatch Report.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. You're one of my favorite authors. Boyd Craven writes post-apocalyptic novels. He also has a fantasy novel that I'm just reading right now as well called First Sight. And when he stayed here for PrepperCon 2 years ago, he actually found inspiration from my property, and he has used my home as a location. So now my home is a location in a novel and a television series. How cool is that? And Boyd, I'm already recognizing the references to it with regards to the elk and the gravel driveway and the neighbor a half a mile away. Let's talk about your new book, Outside the Fire.
Okay. It's a book I wrote last year. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry, just for a second, it got completely quiet. So I wrote this book last year. I was contacted by an editor from Permuted Press about writing a book for them. And it's my first jump into writing for a traditional publisher. So I came up with a whole new scenario and a whole new world. And they, I pitched it, they liked it, and now it's coming out tomorrow. So I'm on pins and needles here, but it's a story about an economic collapse and how unstable things really are.
And an economic collapse, you have a lot of scenarios in your book. You have in your other books, I've noticed EMPs or, some sort of power grid failure. And none of these scenarios are beyond the realm of reason. Our power grid is very vulnerable. I've actually done a show with Greg Carpenter, the host of Reverse Deception, on that aspect of our power grid, how susceptible it is to hacking, for instance, or an EMP. A financial collapse, we have instances of government involvement and messing and corruption with our financial system and the market and the free market system. We have evidence of what happens when that runs amok. It's called Venezuela. I was reading an article last night, actually, how the government agents are actually going around through the streets and murdering people so they can say they're actually fighting crime. So we're getting people there that are starving. We're getting lawlessness. We're getting rogue behavior on the part of the government to try to make themselves look better. They're faking crime scenes, saying that these people actually shot them when they've actually been murdered in cold blood. We see the result of that. So where does this take us in your book, Boyd?
It's kind of a slow fall at first until inflation becomes so noticeable that people that aren't even paying attention start to notice what's going wrong. And the government's response is, we've got this, we're going to take care of this, don't worry about it. And things just go from like a slow fall until it's going so fast that, it's almost like it's running. You can see the world collapsing. And the way that our monetary system is right now, I didn't think it was necessarily the way things would go down, but now I'm kind of worried because you look at what's happening in the markets, you look at the tariffs and the proposed trade wars, you look at, how China's manipulating currency and stuff like that. So,
it's interesting because when I first got involved in investing with some stocks and that sort of thing, I really thought that if you wanted some sort of ability to forecast how well these stocks would do, you could look at, I compared it to these poor saps that go to the racetrack and they look at what they call the racing forms, which shows the history of these horses, their bloodlines, their past race performances, their work performances. But meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes at the racetrack. They call it the backside, working with these racehorses and working with these trainers, helping exercise them. I rode, it was called Pony Rider, where I had a horse that accompanied these horses on their works. And I saw the rampant cheating and manipulation that went on. And these people think that they're actually looking at statistics upon which they can rely to see how this is going to perform. And it's the same darn thing that we have with the economic system. And we have a monetary system based on fiat currency. It's backed by nothing. And you look at the market responses when our elected king says something that either pleases or displeases the market. These stocks can rise or lose value monumentally just by the spoken word or intention of a political party or figure. I tell people, if you're going to invest in stocks, have no more. It's like loaning money. Do no more than you can afford to give away and never see again. Speaking of giveaway, I think you're going to be giving away a copy of one of your books, Boyd. How can we get somebody to listen and answer a question for you and get a free copy of one of your books? By the way, I will say your book was the first kind, Good Fences was the first kind of this genre that I ever read. I ordered it online after seeing the reviews on a sponsored post. And I think I read it straight through, and I sent you a message, and we've been friends ever since. So I love your books. How can other people get hold of one, whether or not they're one of your already regular followers or not?
You can find them on Amazon. All my ebooks are on Amazon. Paperbacks, wherever paperbacks are sold. It's kind of hit and miss who's going to stock them. But for today's giveaway, I put a link up on my Facebook page, on my personal page, with a link to your show. So people listening to the show have a chance to win. So do we want to give away now, or do we want to wait a little bit?
Wait a little bit, because I'm going to share it to your DD12 right now. Okay.
Or actually, maybe I should.
Or you should.
I was going to say, actually, I should.
So, Suzanne, while he's doing that, did you want to introduce Justin at all, or did you already do that? I'm sorry. I'm doing so much in the background. I'm just like lost.
No problem. Yeah, I do want to bring on Justin. Justin Spears is the host of a podcast called The Other Side. He and the co-host, Mike Margison, go live. I believe is it Wednesday night, Justin?
Yeah, we try to stay with Wednesday night. Sometimes we have to mix it up for schedules, but we try to release weekly, usually toward the end of the week.
And we have your shows available on Radio Co for people to listen to. I believe they're also on our YouTube channel. Correct me if I'm wrong when you get a chance, Jeff. But one of your favorite shows, one of my favorite shows that you had done was a brilliant. You laid out the foundation for telling the truth about St. Lincoln. You slayed the sacred cow of St. Lincoln, and you guys just did so in a great way. So I encourage everybody to go and listen to that show. You know, Justin, what we were talking about before this show started, for the past year since President Trump was elected, we have had we've heard nothing from the left but this screaming about Russian collusion and the FBI, Mueller, Rosenstein were going to investigate. And I think the ultimate goal is to impeach Donald Trump. They did not get their way. They were so sure that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of these United States, not state, that now they're doing every means by which they can to get rid of this man, discredit this man. Remember when Obama was elected, they said, well, he's a president now, we all have to work with them. Oh, how things change when they don't get their way. Well, the past few weeks, we're seeing now with the Inspector General's report that the collusion, the corruption, the email server complicity of also Obama, it showed that he actually lied when he said, I just found out about it when you all did. There were emails from him. He lied. All this corruption is going straight to the top, pointing very badly, pointing and it conclusively towards the party that initiated this event or this investigation. So what did we have now? I posted a few days ago before this whole child immigration crisis came about. I said, things aren't looking very good for the left. And again, I don't do left or right, but I'm pointing out that things are looking very good for Donald Trump with the successful North Korean talks and President Kim Jong-un saying that, saying that I will denuclearize North Korea. Even talks and meetings with North Korea, 68 years, nothing's happened. Trump goes in there and we have this. I'll give credit where credit is due. I always do. And then the results of the investigation and the Inspector General's report and testimony. What do we have? A manufactured immigration crisis. Children being separated from their parents as they have been since the Clinton era. Bill Clinton signed this piece of legislation into law. A deportation hearing, immigration hearing, takes over 20 days to happen. So what happens to these people when they bring in their children? Well, the children have to be somewhere else while the parents are detained. And now the left is bringing up these pictures, many of which have been doctored, by the way, of children screaming. And as they always do, these individuals grab onto these sound bites like a pit bull, and there is no reasoning with them. And the party of stupid capitulates to the party of evil. And President Trump signs an executive order saying that these children now will not be separated from their families. So I'm wondering, what's the result of this going to be? Are we going to be housing these children with the adults? What could possibly go wrong? Something else I see happening now, if bringing a child with you is a get out of free card, is one of the unintended consequences going to be children either being abducted or sold possibly by their parents as a get out of jail free card to come over here? What are your thoughts on that, Justin?
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head there when you were talking about there, not being a right or wrong. It's both sides of this issue here are in the wrong, and I know that typically what the media tries to do is want to pit the one against the other, whatever the situation is, whether it's the gun control issue, immigration issue, whatever that might be. You have to divide and conquer, and the media does a fantastic job of doing that. And I think when you look at this from the perspective of, government doing its job and governing, it just is a classic textbook example of how, just broken this system is. And, when you get down to the brass tacks of, okay, you can talk about all the theory behind it and everything, but what about the reality of what happens here with this scenario and this situation? I think that ultimately what we see here is the big players. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about the idea of who runs the government, right? Who is actually pulling the strings on these issues. You see a handful of people get out in front of the cameras on these types of things. And that's where we need to really focus our efforts. If you want to talk about real change, real solutions, what can we do? We can focus our attention on getting away from standing in front of the television and letting the politics of fear and what these people that get in front of the cameras have to say, the ones that are the quote unquote decision makers, the movers and shakers, and focus on what's going on around you. Focus on what you can do in and around your area that you live in, your community. On the other side, one of the things that we oftentimes focus on when we get down to the solutions part of our show is thinking about, what you can do in and around the area you live in. There was the famous quote that all politics are local, and that's a little bit of a lie in a way, in that everything is local. Everything can be broken down to what affects you at your local level. So when you see these stories and you hear these things, what we need to be thinking about is what can we do in where we live, in and around where we live, to institute change. And that's what I would encourage the listeners to think about, is when you hear and see these stories, think about what is that you can do as an individual to help with a problem in and around the area that you live in, and not be sucked in by the politics of division and what the role the media plays. And by the way, for those of you that have heard me before, know that I'm part of that triangle that Suzanne referenced. I am a public education teacher, and I am trying to also undo some of what is going on in our public education system. And so get involved at the local level, and hopefully you can make an impact that way.
Yes, and by the way, I am also part of the problem as an attorney. I came into this, I think Andrew, our good friend Andrew Avery, said I was able to overcome that impediment because I was a product of what I refer to as the malfeasance of the legal education system. We are taught, you go to constitutional law, the first case you are taught is, I bet you know what it is, Justin.
Is it going to be Marbury versus Madison?
You get a cookie. And we really don't get into the background of that. It's pretty much with everything else you have to learn in law school and everything else you're doing, what they typically come away with is Marbury versus Madison resulted in the Supreme Court being the ultimate arbiter of all things constitutional. We never even discussed the preamble to the Bill of Rights. We never discussed the intention of the Bill of Rights. In fact, and I've said this before on the show, when we're studying for bar review for the multi-state part of the exam, which is multiple choice, if you have an option between the 10th Amendment and the 14th Amendment justifying states' power for the latter, or federal government power on the latter, or supporting state sovereignty on the former, we are taught to always answer the 14th Amendment. I tell people, if I took the bar exam right now and answered the questions on the bar exam according to the Constitution as ratified, I would fail. So we are rewarded in not only my area, but also going all the way down to yours, Justin, in the public education system. By giving the wrong answers, we get good grades. We get accolades from our parents and teachers. We maybe get a bike or a treat or some other kind of reward for getting getting this information wrong. That carries through to getting the right job, to getting you do well in law school, and guess what? You can become a law professor and perpetuate these fallacious notions that we have one nation that was formed under this Constitution and the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter. And, we have immigration right now. Let's jump into that. Immigration right now is at the forefront of our national dialogue. I hate the N-word, but that is part and parcel. The heart and soul of what our problems are is nationalizations. I've had talks about this with Dave Benner. I did a show. He has a book called Compact of the Republic. He absolutely brilliantly, systematically explains how at the time, the Declaration of Independence said that these colonies are not to be free and independent states. That was carried over to the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. In fact, there is a guy on CNN, he wrote a book about McCulloch versus Maryland and said at the time of the Constitution, states and a nation came together to form a compact. That's absolutely ridiculous. Kevin Gutzman akin that to being a party to your own conception. It just doesn't work. Think about that visual for a minute and then move on. But I wrote an article that was published in the 10th Amendment Center. It's called The Constitutional Solution to Immigration. And I bring this up when I make AM radio appearances, and a lot of people have an opportunity to hear this point of view. And immediately after I present the historic information, they absolutely disregard it and say, but, well, there's no but. Let's break this down. Somebody said I did a beautiful job of, I posted this on one of Kevin Gutzman's threads about Donald Trump saying that they're just going to deport people without any kind of hearing or due process whatsoever. That's another subject. But I put this article up in there and somebody said this just stated it brilliantly and simply. And I said, I'm a simple person. When I spoke at an education conference in Alabama in March, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you put the hay where the goats could get it. And that's my goal here, is to try and teach people that, look, there's another way of looking at these situations, and you're not hearing this on the mainstream Media, that's branch 3. You can go and listen. I don't care if it's NBC, CNN, MSNBC, whatever all of these are, Fox Network, they all propose national solutions to immigration. I wrote this article, What is the Constitutional Solution to Immigration, which these people write off as completely unworkable. If you'll recall, on my episode last week, I was reading from I think it was Jay Knox's book, Albert J. Knox. There's a chapter on there that was published in Mises.org, and it mentioned a trip that Thomas Jefferson took to New York in 1790. And by that time, his opinions, his views on government were already outmoded. In his trip to New York, nobody was talking about natural rights. Everybody was talking about strong central government and the benefits of a strong central government. What we're seeing now is the pitfalls of a strong central government. Did you want to talk about an article that you had found touching on that as well, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quickly before I do that too, I think it is worth noting again that, even in the education system, and too, like you, where if you look at, I teach in the state of Indiana, and when you look at our Indiana state standards, I have a hard time each and every year that I go back into the classroom for a new year, stomaching and swallowing that I am supposed to adhere to and teach the standards that are set forth by the state of Indiana, that are arbitrarily set, by the way, by people who probably have little to no understanding of what these founding documents mean to our nation. It becomes increasingly more difficult to do that. And the indoctrination that takes place throughout the schools in our country in regards to understanding, what the Constitution is, what the Declaration of Independence is and was, and just to kind of understand in 2018 how those documents apply. It's completely twisted and just contorted sense of history there. So yeah, no, to go back to what you were saying there too, I'm a big proponent, and I've read a little bit of Lysander Spooner, and he has a piece called No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. And I know you had a thread on Facebook where you had mentioned the idea of the Constitution being an abysmal failure. And that really set some people off. There were obviously some agreeing and some disagreeing. But what Spooner does, and again, this is part of that, was it Mike Church that used to talk about unplugging the matrix cable from the back of your head?
Yeah, him and Mark Cresslin's. In fact, Mark Cresslin's show actually started with that scene from The Matrix.
That's right. Yes,
with Neo and who was the other guy? I don't remember the names.
Right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And so that this kind of process, right, of uneducating yourself from the way that you were educated, that's what we attempt to do on the other side. The whole impetus of our show is to present to you a version that you weren't taught in public schools, that you don't read on the mainstream media or watch on TV. And so this is a very, very eye-opening, jarring conversion to go through. And oftentimes you'll find yourself second guessing or saying, yeah, but, and you have to kind of let it go, and it'll start to sink in and penetrate and hopefully make sense. And so Spooner, in his piece, No Treason, and I'm just going to read a couple of quick excerpts here, and then I'll throw it back over to you, Suzanne. He starts off by talking about what was the Constitution, right? Does anybody ever really talk about this beyond just, okay, well, we know that there was this thing called the Annapolis Convention, and a couple of the Federalists got together, knew they weren't having any success with getting any kind of amendment to the Articles of Confederation. So they devised this plan to create a new system of government at the convention in Philadelphia. He says the Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all unless it's a contract between man and man. And it does not so much as even purport to be a contract between persons now existing. And he goes on to talk about how the people that obviously created this are dead and gone. So what binding, legal binding does it have on us today? And he goes on to essentially say there is none, right? And he even goes deeper into talking about kind of the idea of our posterity, right? That when you read through what was the goal, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. He goes on to talk about what does that mean. And again, he re-echoes here the idea that this is not meaning that it has to be binding. There's nothing that, like, when you do something for your future people, you know, it's binding on them. You're doing it in hopes that they'll see the beauty in it, that they'll take to it, but they have to take the action to do that. Just because you create something doesn't mean that it automatically is in effect for those that come after you. They have to accept it, basically, right? And this is another way of, when people always talk about the social contract theory, some hardcore libertarians will say, I never signed a contract, right? And so that's essentially what he's saying here. Here's what I want to leave off with, and I think this is fascinating. At the end of this opening section, he says, if then those who established the Constitution had no power to bind it and did not attempt to bind their posterity, the question arises whether their posterity have bound themselves, right? So have we committed any actions? Have we taken anything that binds us to the Constitution? He says, if they have done so, they can only have done it by one of two ways: voting and paying taxes. And I find that fascinating there, because one of those two is voluntary. Right. I mean, there's a lot of pressure put on people to say, well, it's your civic duty. You have to show up and vote. But yet, you know, it's not compulsory at this point. But what do we know about paying taxes? Obviously, that's a huge one, right? We always see the memes out there about taxation is theft. And again, more hardcore libertarians will you know, present a side that says, you know, that taxation is theft and we should avoid it at all costs and things of that nature. So I find that fascinating that Spooner boils it down to those are the two actions that one can take to bind you to the Constitution. And then I think the next question needs to logically be that if we are to avoid those two things and to outright reject them, then what, right? And I know we were having a conversation before we came on about secession and things of that nature. I find that kind of fascinating. I know that's a conversation for another time, but I think Spooner's got some excellent points, and I'd encourage people, you can Google Lysander Spooner No Treason. You can find free PDFs. Mises even has a free audiobook version of this. Take time and listen to it, read through it, and kind of let it work and eat away at, again, kind of breaking down some of those preconceived notions about the Constitution.
And it's a really interesting topic, because nobody is saying that the Constitution as ratified is something that we are bound to irrevocably to this day. Now, that doesn't go to say that we can have de facto constitutional amendments vis-a-vis the federal judiciary, where nobody invites the states and the fundamental principles of the Constitution are eradicated. There are ways by which we can modify or even disavow this Constitution, and that is look at Article 5 and look at Article 7, the latter which reaffirms that it was the states that ratified and created this Constitution, delegated powers to the states, as we see in the 10th Amendment, reaffirms that any power not delegated, enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 to the legislature and Congress, remains with the states. Article 5 tells us that the Constitution can be amended. If there's something that has come up that was not foreseen back at the day, we can amend the Constitution to fit modern times. In that regard, it is a living, breathing document subject to change as society needs. But there's a method by which we do that, and that is not vis-a-vis the federal judiciary. Congress can propose a constitutional amendment, and then it must be ratified by 3/4 of the states, or the states themselves can propose a constitutional amendment, 2/3. They can propose a convention, constitutional convention, and then 3/4 have to ratify whatever is proposed. What does this mean? This means that the states themselves, absent the general government, are the final arbiters of the general government's power. They can modify the general government's obligations, responsibilities, duties, without ever even bringing Congress into it. One person told me on our other page that the states can't modify the Constitution without involving the general government, and that is absolutely false. They can actually even disband, abrogate the Constitution and not even bring about the general government. That would be a fantastic solution. They can start over and get the criminals out of our lives. Now, we have tyranny at local levels we have to deal with, but do we really think that we have a representative form of government right now? When we have this nationalism that we talked about earlier, and this dismantling of the federal republic that we had before the war against Southern secession, which resulted really in an inversion of what was set up and what was intended, everything becomes a point of national contention. These, be it gay marriages, be it school busing, be it immigration, everything is a matter of national concern. Jobs, the economy. I mean, you know, it's never ending. And we end up with what Alexander Hamilton essentially wanted, was an elected king. He wanted a monarchy. We have presidents now that are issuing executive orders over topics such as immigration that the general government had no authority to regulate in the first place. Let me turn to my article momentarily for a moment. The Constitution was submitted again to 13 states for ratification. I mentioned this earlier. They were sovereign and independent, and through a compact formed a union which was voluntary in nature. Again, this was expressed in the Declaration of Independence. They retained this right to determine who they would allow to cross their borders and live within their societies. That right was never delegated to the general government by the states, and that is the right to decide who is going to live within their territorial borders. Well, this gets confusing because Article 1 says, Article 1, Section 8, I believe, Clause 4, the states had delegated the general government to have uniform rules of naturalization. We have Article 1, Section 9, the relevant part saying the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808. So I'm getting a message here that we need to go to a break. Radio Co has dropped. So we're going to be back momentarily. We're going to fix this technical issue. Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We'll be right back.
Fair enough. Okay, Roger, your special subject tonight is the economies of the European community. Your time starts now. Best of luck.
Thank you.
How much does Greece owe, Roger?
$367 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Mostly to the other European economies.
Correct. How much does Ireland owe?
$865 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Other European economies, mostly.
Correct. How much do Spain and Italy owe?
$1 trillion each.
Correct. Who to?
Mainly France, Britain and Germany.
Correct. And how are Germany, France and Britain going, Roger?
Well, they're struggling a bit, aren't they?
Correct. Why?
Because they've lent all these vast amounts of money to other European economies that can't possibly pay them back.
Correct. So what are they going to do?
They're going to have to bail them out.
Correct. Where are they getting the money to do that, Roger?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
How much does Portugal owe?
Hang on a minute. What was the answer to that earlier question?
Just keep answering the questions, Roger. Where is Portugal going to get the money it owes to Germany if Germany can't get back the money that it lent to Italy?
Just a minute. What was the answer to the previous question? The question was, how can broke economies lend money to other broke economies who haven't got any money because they can't pay back the money the broke economy lent to the other broke economy and shouldn't have lent it to them in the first place because the broke economy can't pay it back?
You're wasting very valuable time, Roger. How much money does Spain owe to Italy?
$41 billion, but where are they going to get it?
Correct. What does Italy owe to Spain?
$27 billion, but they haven't got it. They're broke.
Correct. How can they pay each other if neither of them has any money?
They're going to get a bailout, aren't they?
Correct. And where's the money coming from for the bailout?
That's what I'm asking you.
Correct. Why are people selling the European currency and buying the US dollar?
Because the US economy is so much stronger than the European economy.
Correct. Why is that, Roger?
Because it's owned by China.
Correct. And very well done. And after that round, you've lost $1 million.
I've lost $1 million. I thought you said well done.
Yes, well done. You've only lost $1 million. That's an extraordinary performance,
I've
Roger.
only lost $1 million.
Very well done.
And that's quite good, is it?
Oh, it's excellent.
Sell everything immediately. Quickly.
Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Wasatch Report. Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Justin Spears from the other side joining us today with the producer and co-founder of the network here, and that would be Jeff Johnson. Boyd Craven, author extraordinaire, is joining us as well with some commentary as well. He has a book coming out tomorrow called Outside the Fire. Go over to his author page and find out how you can get a free copy, signed copy, I believe, even of that book. It's also available on Amazon in Kindle version. We left off before the break. I was discussing the immigration issue and who has, in light of the current crisis we have today and Donald Trump's executive order, who really, according to the Constitution as ratified, had the authority to regulate immigration. And as I left off, the states had never delegated that authority to the general government. It's not in Article 1, Section 8. What we do have in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 is the delegation of the authority of Congress to set up uniform rules of naturalization. Naturalization being the means by which people that are here that are not citizens may become United States citizens. That is not the same as immigration. You have to remember, when 13 sovereign and independent states on a par with England, France, Spain came together and formed a compact for essentially two purposes: to form a common defense and in effect a free trade zone. They did not give up their right to determine who was going to live within their territorial borders. They were reluctant to surrender this authority to determine who could enter within their borders, and local policy and social policy and social decisions were going to remain with the states. Because why? Because they would have a better opportunity for representation. Remember, we went to war to escape a system under which there was no representation for the Americans over on this side of the pond. And parliamentary sovereignty was a big problem because England had no written constitution. Everything Parliament did was obviously constitutional or legal. So we are living under, we went to war to get away from this. I mentioned the war against Southern secession and independence resulted in an inversion of our federal system, making it now, meaning that now we live under a system of national rule. Every issue has become a point of contention. We have a federal government, a national government, which allows people to cross illegally. We attract them. I've been looking at an article and different commentaries saying that these people are invaders. And therefore, it is incumbent upon, because the general government was supposed to protect us from invasion from foreign entities, you have to ask, are these people invaders or are we inviting them? I remember George W. Bush saying these people are good for the economy. At one point, the people coming back and forth from Mexico, they would go back when their work was done. We didn't have these issues where it became such a political movement, where we have seen now the leftists, the Marxists, wanting to use these people, much like the big government Republicans of the 19th century wanted to use the freed blacks as an excuse to expand government and power on their side. So we're having now these people brought over here by a magnet. As long as we have these magnets of benefits coming from the national government, we have a Supreme Court ruling that said the kids that come here cannot be excluded from the public education system. We are seeing them being included now in socialized health care. Remember when there was an argument going on about the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, cough, cough, that it would not be open to people here illegally. Well, they jumped the ship on that one very quickly. So I don't think a wall is even going to help as long as we have these national benefits. So this is the problem. I have said that if California wants to become a sanctuary state, it has its constitutional authority to do so. But here's the problem. It is not bearing the fiscal responsibility that their policies create. They are creating a tremendous burden, and they are looking to the general government to subsidize this burden. Nationalism and the fact that states have become merely subsidiaries to the whole, those who enter the states with lax borders, sanctuary policies, may now burden other states. And that is the biggest argument I hear about state sovereignty when it comes to immigration. Well, then they leave there and come over here. And that's the problem with the erosion of the state's borders from a political standpoint. It becomes a national issue. These people are free to travel and collect benefits across this continental landmass. What this means is that one state's residents must pay the price for policy-making decisions of another. The founders and the ratifiers took painstaking measures to ensure that this would not happen and to accept that federal domination over the states when it comes to immigration issues and laws is to reject the notions that the states are capable of self-governance. And if we reject that, then we have surrendered our revolutionary legacy. What say you, Justin?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And just to kind of echo what you were mentioning too there before we went to break, I went ahead and pulled out my U.S. government textbook that I have. This is the Magruder's American Government Textbook, an overview of the Constitution. And it says in here, the Constitution is the nation's fundamental law. It is, by its own terms, the supreme law of the land, the highest form of law in the United States. And I think Dr. Gutzman said it on your Facebook post pretty adequately when he talked about the idea that written constitutions are being proven that they don't work. They have to be enforced by the government against itself, and they won't be, sort of like leaving it up to the Department of Justice to punish the Attorney General who is held in contempt of Congress.
How's that working?
Right, exactly, right. And so I think, you know, that kind of relaying that back to the topic at hand here, it's just case in point, right? I mean, you know, that's why I mentioned earlier, and again, I encourage those out there that are kind of trying to wrestle with this in your mind about, okay, but what does all of this mean, right? Like we go through this and we talk about it and everybody agrees with it, but what does it mean? Again, I really encourage you to act on a local level. Brian McClanahan talks about this a lot on his show, you know, where you think act local. I just keep coming back to that so much and thinking about what goes on in my neighborhood, what goes on in my town, my county. Obviously, the smaller, the better. You know, you can have the more impact there. But allowing California, like you said, if California wants to be a sanctuary state, fine. But yes, you're absolutely right. It has to bear the fiscal responsibility of what that means. And unfortunately, going back again to talking about who the decision makers and the movers and shakers in the government are, the policies from both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, are looking at this as, how can we gain potential voters out of this? That's what it all boils down to. They don't care about the financial outcome, the fiscal crisis that we're in, the mess that's going to be left behind socially when you allow people just willy-nilly able to come in and set up shop. Look what's happened over in Europe with the migrant crisis that they've had over there with different people from the Middle East just being flooded into. I read an article earlier this year about what has happened, and I can't remember if it was in Stockholm or somewhere in one of the Nordic countries, where basically they're losing their heritage, they're losing their culture, and it's all because they can't put their foot down and say, this is who we are. They have to be so opening and so tolerant of all of the different people that are coming in. They can't even say, this is who we are. If you lose your identity of your culture, if you lose your identity of who you are as a society, then why even have any kind of borders or any kind of setup of a society anywhere? I think that is something else that needs to be talked about in this conversation as well.
Well, you know, and that strikes me because my family, my mom is from Sweden, and I have a lot of relatives. And I remember when I was younger, and I would go over there, and they have these discussions about, you can look around and see all the houses, and they say, you know, all the houses look alike, but everybody in Sweden is equal. We all have the same thing. And I was just a little girl, and I'm thinking, but how can people be all equal and have the same thing? Because not everybody contributes the same thing. Not everybody is a doctor. Some people do, you know, some people work with their hands. Some people have jobs that don't pay as much. How can everybody have the same thing? Well, you pretty much get it with a 90% plus tax rate. And then as things got a little bit different over there, I started hearing the issues about the socialized medicine and how long my family members were having to wait to get help. Then I started hearing about this immigration issue. My cousin was in Sweden. She's actually there right now. And I think we're just going to go for an hour, Jeff. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm just answering a question to the producer. She was there a couple years ago and was asking about the issue about the rape crisis and the lawlessness that is going on around Sweden right now. And she was accused of being a racist. These people are throwing their own women under the bus, under the, you know, for the altar of political correctness, diversity, and inclusion. I mean, talk about Stockholm syndrome. This is absolutely crazy. Thomas Jefferson even said there should be some standards for people that want to come from abroad and come and live here. They shouldn't be, I think the terms were vagabonds, criminals, that sort of thing. They should have something to contribute. But that certainly is not what we're looking at right now. And, you know, Boyd, I think before we run out of time, you wanted to contribute something as well with regards to immigration and Donald Trump's executive order. Again, going back to my article, according to the Constitution as ratified, this is not an issue that the general government had any delegated authority to regulate whatsoever. We have a presumption now that because we have federal immigration laws, that he can amend them. Well, let's go with the assumption that we have federal immigration laws, but now all of a sudden, Chuck Schumer is demanding that Donald Trump issue an executive order to remedy a situation because clearly we have a crisis. So in this instance, they want a king. I really thought this was going to be a setup, that he would issue an executive order and they would accuse him of violating the Constitution and trying to impeach him. But I digress. Go ahead, Boyd.
Well, in general, we've talked about executive orders, I think, before on another show. And I don't think in this case he really did much more than punt the entire issue back to the lawmakers, because this is, you know, everything was going good. North Korea was a good win. You know, it's still a process, but no one in the last, 60, 70 years have even tried to talk to him and had anything come of it. So, I mean, what's the problem with trying? And this whole border crisis and kids getting separated from their families, I think what he did is just took the narrative back and threw it back on the lawmakers. This shouldn't be a November election issue for them. It shouldn't be their rallying cry because it's their problem that they created to begin with. Whether or not that is their job and whether they have the right to do that, I don't know. But it's just like when DAPA was declared unconstitutional. When Trump took office, there was, I think, 19 state attorney generals that were threatening to sue the Department of Justice over DACA, or, you know, and he ended DACA and he gave it a 6-month horizon and said, you know, you guys have 6 months to fix this. Well, right now it's tied up in the Supreme Court. What's going to happen, I think, is he put all of this back on the lawmakers again. And I think it's very calculated, and, you know, they've been having this issue. They keep punting it back and forth. I think he's firmly put it back on them now. So,
yeah, I think it was a masterful decision that he made. He put it back on them and said, okay, now problem solved. The issue is going to be, what are they going to complain about next? But what's interesting, Boyd, is you being a prepper, you and I have similar mindsets on this as well from a preparedness standpoint. Who is responsible for keeping their children safe? Ultimately, it is the job of the parents to keep their children safe.
Exactly.
And I'm not even going to get into, well, as a libertarian, you should think that these laws are absolutely horrific. You know, we were talking earlier about the government, the consent of the governed. We have this government because of ultimately there were individuals and states that consented to it. So when we have a government, its object, its natural, its proper role is to defend liberty. Well, whose liberties? The people who consented to that government, or the liberties of anybody and everybody around the world because their children are crying and they want to come here. The problem is now with all these social justice warrior affirmative action programs is the children, our children, are going to be suffering for these policies in perpetuity. Look now that we're seeing all these social justice, administrative and admission policies in the schools and the college systems, job preferences. These people are always going to be selected. It is nearly impossible now for a white Christian male to get a job over one of these people. This is not racism here. This is not people. This is me not being having a phobia about immigrants, about people of color. This is the reality that we're seeing now with the social justice warriors and the nationalization of these immigration policies. And we have to turn to the question now, is the Constitution actually, because it has been completely usurped, and we're going to have to do this on another show, but I want to set the stage for the next show. Is this actually a failure? If you look on that thread, go to my page on Facebook, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman, and read that thread, and we're going to discuss that. I want to also, before we close out, say how people can get a copy of Boyd's latest book. Boyd, I'm going to let you run with that.
Well, before we do that, before we run out of time, I want to do a giveaway. Is that all right with everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So we thought we would come up with something funny as a suggestion from Jeff and Suzanne. For people that are wanting to win a free ebook of this, I made a post on my Facebook page and then in one of the prepping groups and also in one of the in the DD12 Post APOC Army of Reader group. So I'm going to ask a question. In the first, let's see, how do we want to do this?
Just get your first correct answer.
All right, first correct answer. So let's go with an easy one to start with. What breed of dog is Opus and Raider in my books, One Man's Opus and Blackout? So as soon as I see that notification pop up, I will private message the person and get their details.
And if you have not read Boyd's book, I suggest you do. I love your series. And again, these are topics that are even though they're novels, they are relevant. All these scenarios are very likely to happen and have happened before. I want to just read my post from the other day, and I want you to think about whether or not, how correct am I on this? I was told that it was a little bit harsh, but that's kind of what we do here. You know, if you want to tune into a station that will cater or pander to your political leanings and make you feel good and just, you can argue and you know, hear what you want to hear all day long, this isn't the place for you. We challenge our listeners. We challenge our Facebook followers. We challenge those that read our articles. We open a lot of eyes. We make a lot of people angry, but our goal is, again, get you to unplug from this matrix. So here was what I said the other day. And this was in response to a post I had seen on another page where a gal out here locally said, you know, Salt Lake City does not have a parade for the 4th of July. We need a parade so we can honor our Constitution. And I thought, you know, the 4th of July is about celebrating our revolutionary legacy. The Constitution, I put here, has proven to be an abysmal failure, however well-intended you think it may have been. Those who cling to it and promote themselves as experts in how, if we only go back to restoring the Constitution and our great nation, I call them nothing more than Judas goats. Is that harsh? I believe not. I think the truth sometimes is not pretty, much like those, you know, images we're seeing about human abortion. The truth isn't always pretty, but it's something we have to face. And go to that page, go to my page, read the commentary on this thread. I think a lot of the points there are very enlightening. We'll do a show about that later in the week when we have time. Justin, you're more than welcome to come back. Love to have you with me on that. Yeah.
We'll make over a minute here, but hey, Boyd, did you get a winner?
I did.
Yay.
Yay.
Yep, I did. Do we want to give away another one? I'll make it the harder question.
Go for it. If here's a bonus chance, folks out there. I hope you, Boyd Craven listeners, are listening, because he's going to give you another chance to win.
So, okay, so this will be a little bit more difficult. What's the name of the motorhome in One Man's Opus, which coincidentally is the same name as my motorhome? And it's talked about on Facebook. So go ahead in those threads where people have been listening and watching and answer there, send me a message. First one to get it wins.
Lots of fun. If you have read One Man's Opus, I'm starting Opus Odyssey. I believe that is the sequel to it. So again, folks, go back to the Constitution has proven to be an abysmal failure. My discussion on that, the main argument against it is the Constitution was a fantastic argument. It is the people who failed it. My premise for writing that post was the Constitution intended to grant us liberty, or was it intended to be a Trojan horse, which would usher in a strong centralized government, ultimately resulting in our loss of self-governance, our revolutionary legacy? Stay tuned. We'll be back later in the week. Want to thank Boyd Craven, Jeff Johnson, my producer, co-founder of the network, and Justin Spears. We'll be back later in the week. We will let you know when exactly, when we figure it out ourselves. This has been the Wasatch Report here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless you.